Hello and welcome to the deal. I'm your host, Ed Clark, and thank you for taking another weekend to come in and visit with us. And we got a very exciting program again today. As always, Val Atkinson is going to be in with us to help us make some sense of what happened in politics in the world today and throughout the last week since we were on. We'll also be talking about education a little bit later. We'll have Frances McNeill. She's been in with us before. She's an educational consultant. We want to talk about what is the deal with opening schools back up, whether or not they're going to be able to open up. And if they do, what are the chances that we make it through a whole school year? And then, of course, we also want to evaluate how things worked out when they were trying to do remote learning. Frances has a lot to say about that. In addition to that, we're hoping to have a principal from one of the elementary schools in Franklin County, North Carolina. So we're still holding on the line for them. So hopefully they'll be in. But in the meantime, let's go ahead and get to business. Val Atkinson, welcome back to the deal.
Thank you, Ed. As always, it's a pleasure to be here.
Well, Val, look, there's been so much stuff going on. You can't make up the fact that the president of the United States put two people on the court, and he had 2 7-2 rulings in one day on Thursday that essentially said that he's not above the law. I know they tried to spin it a different way, and the president tried to say that this was not he actually had a victory by the end of the day, after he first said that he was pissed off at the court for going against him or whatever. Talk to me about did the president at least have a stalemate, or did he lose on Thursday in the Supreme Court?
Well, I think he may have had a stalemate there. I think that the court gave us something we already had. In other words, we already knew that the president wasn't above the law. It's in the Constitution. So by them coming out and saying that, you haven't given us anything, but it was almost as though it was a compromise. Okay, we'll say that the president's not above the law, but you don't get a chance to see his taxes, okay? Right now, anyway. And that's not a good deal, because you're giving me something I already got. And, I don't like that, the way they did that, but it confirmed we don't have to go back to the courts again if they try to pull that on some other issue. What it does, it says that the courts already rule on that, and there is no special immunity that the president has that the rest of us don't. No one is above the law. We've already ruled on that. We're not going to re-examine that. So that's one positive that comes out of that. But on the other hand, as it relates to giving the Congress some ammunition or giving them a blueprint as to what they need to do to come back again and request to take a look at his financial files and that kind of thing. That was a half and half. What they've done is denied the Congress access before the election, but not close the gates on whether or not they can ever have access again. They did not challenge the oversight provision within the Constitution that Congress has over the presidency. So they can still do that. But I think one of the clear winners, of course, was the whole ruling on whether or not a locality, a municipality, or whatever, a state can ask for and receive elements of a subpoena from the president. And they ruled that, yes, it could be done, but this is how it needs to be done. You need to go back. We're going to remand this portion of it back to the appellate court or the district court, wherever it came from, and which means that you can't do it before the election. That came up again too. So it doesn't matter. I'm okay with that personally, because I don't think it would have had that much of an impact on the election anyway. I mean, there's nothing in his financial records that his base would have said, aha, I can't vote for him now. There's nothing.
And there's also nothing that we don't already suspect. Like
Right.
Michael Cohen already told us that none of his books were right, that everything was made up, right? So we already knew that already.
Absolutely. So I think it's a wash in a way. Nothing's going to come out of that. But I feel good about that decision in that the financial papers of Donald Trump, including his companies and businesses, along with his taxes, are going to be revealed after the election, I believe. And at that point, people will be able to see whatever. There could be, very possibly be, criminal charges come down. And I'll say this one last thing on that, Ed, is that watch out for Deutsche Bank on this whole piece, because there's a lot of information that has arisen of the dealings between Deutsche Bank and Donald Trump, where he got his money, how it was laundered, and those kinds of things. I think people are sweating over that Deutsche Bank right now on this ruling that was made by the Supreme Court.
I think so too, because they've had some problems with money laundering in the past in other jurisdictions, and I think, maybe we'll use a Malcolm Xism. The chickens may be coming home to roost for some folks when people reveal those records. Let's switch gears. We know, Val, that COVID-19 has not been dealt with properly here in the United States. We lead the world by far in number of cases, in the number of deaths. And the president likes to say we lead in testing, but that's not true in terms of raw numbers maybe, but as a percentage of the population. But the president doubled down on this. He said that we were doing too much testing. And he even alluded to a couple of weeks ago at his Tulsa rally that he was trying to prevent additional testing from going on. And out of that rally in Tulsa, a guy named Herman Cain, who is proudly there, who ran for president. He's an African-American guy, but supports the president. He got hospitalized due to having COVID that he probably got in Tulsa. And the folks in Tulsa, the medical folks in Tulsa, just on Friday said that their numbers are attributed to all these people coming to town, that they've had a spike. Why is the president still talking about like COVID is not real and that we shouldn't do anything about it? He's pretty much separated himself from that whole COVID task force. And a lot of times he and the vice president are talking at two polar opposite ends. What's going on with his take on COVID? Why does he want us to believe that it's gone away when we can clearly see it hasn't?
Well, this is the only tool that Donald Trump has in his toolbox, Ed. As you and I say all the time, if the only tool you got's a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And this is the only way he knows how to fight this. The problem comes, and I was glad to hear you bring the vice president up, because I've been saying for some time, the 25th Amendment is a non-starter. We might as well not have the 25th Amendment in the Constitution. The 25th Amendment gives the vice president the authority to do something about the presidency. When the president is obviously acting out of character, he may be sick, he may be ill, something's wrong, he can call a meeting amongst all of the president's cabinet and others, and they can take over the government until the president is ready to come back. And that's why they put that in there. It's not a suggestion. It's not a policy issue to be discussed. It's a part of the Constitution of the United States of America. And they are behaving as though it does not exist. Now, getting back to Donald Trump, as his niece has pointed out, is in her book, this guy is afraid of his job. He's met his Peter principle. All of us have that we are promoted to upward to a level of incompetency. And that's where he is. He's at his Peter principle right now. He didn't expect to get elected to the position of president of the United States. He was shocked, but his ego wouldn't let him do anything but take it and walk around and strut like a peacock or whatever. He knows that he doesn't have the mental acuity, the background, the history, the anything to be president of the United States. But it's his enablers, starting with Mitch McConnell and Mike Pence and all of those who are allowing the United States of America and its allies to go through this pandemic, the destruction of the economy, maybe, the explosion of race relations, all of those things, just to make sure Donald Trump gets a chance to stay in office. It's unbelievable to me. I don't know how you're going to write about this, what history is going to say about it.
Yeah, that is going to be interesting what history has to say about it. I want to remind the folks you're watching and listening to The Deal with Ed Clark, and Val Atkinson is back in with us again this weekend, and we're trying to make sense of the world where there is no sense, right? COVID-19 is real. People are dying. The numbers are going up. The economy has not improved, despite what the president says. There have been some interesting rulings in the Supreme Court over this last session. The only thing we can hope at this point is that this president does not get the opportunity to appoint any more justices. Val, in the time we got left here, we got about 5 more minutes. And I want to switch gears a little bit. And one of the things that has been on the front burner a lot is whether or not schools are going to open back up. And we'll have some guests a little bit later on to try to help us make some sense of that, some educational experts to talk about, how that's going. But talk to me about what is the rationale for the president getting in a room with people and saying that he's going to put pressure on governors to open up schools? What does he benefit by having schools reopen?
Well, if we connect the dots, Ed, what he wants to do is reopen the schools, have kids to go to school. Now the parents don't have an excuse to stay home. And the parents go back to work. The employers open up. Hopefully some governors will take away restrictions, and the economy gets back to what they like to call normal. That's his strategy. That's the only thing he can run on right now. He doesn't have anything else except to hope the economy gets better. So he's putting the lives of our children, our teachers, our parents, you're putting all of those lives at risk so that the economy can get to a point that he'll have a campaign issue that he can talk about in a positive way for this election coming up in November. That's the only reason he's doing this. He doesn't care about anybody. He doesn't care about anything. He is putting children's lives at risk so he can have a better chance at winning re-election.
Mm-hmm. I've heard, Val, that there have been some Republicans who are dubious about going to Jacksonville for the convention for the same reasons, because if they didn't want to come to Charlotte really, and now the president's putting pressure on people to come to Jacksonville for his sort of coronation speech, to take the nomination again for the party, and it's just to be a pep rally. But now they're talking about maybe holding the event outside. So there's some cracks in the fissure, right? That the president knows that the Tulsa rally was stupid, was not a good idea, that the event they did in Arizona was not a good idea because now Phoenix is leading the world in new corona cases. Do you see any cracks at all where there may be some Republicans that maybe senatorial Republicans that don't need the president to be around to help them out? And I'm thinking specifically about Tom Tillis in North Carolina. Since we live in North Carolina, we've had Cal Cunningham on this program and on Connections as well. The numbers in the polls look as though Cal Cunningham is leading Tom Tillis in North Carolina, which is a really important Senate seat. A lot of money has been spent. And down in South Carolina, Jamie Harrison seems to be putting some pressure on our friend Lindsey Graham. Is it possible that there's enough cracks in the fissure or enough cracks in Donald Trump's, Teflon coating that he can't be coattails for anybody? So there's a good chance that Cal Cunningham or Jamie Harrison could win in North or South Carolina.
I'm on the side that says, Ed, that Democrats are going to take back the Senate. I think Cal Cunningham will do well in North Carolina. I think he'll beat Tom Tillis, and there are going to be a few other races. There's been one very prominent Democratic strategist who said that the question is whether or not Democrats will win 4 or 8 seats. Somewhere between 4 and 8. All we need is 4 to take back the Senate. So it's looking very bad for Republican senatorial candidates right now. And I think some of them, to get back to your first part of your question, are seeing the writing on the wall, and they're trying to get a little distance between them and Trump. Maybe they can get some of those middle ground voters out there. Except maybe somebody would say, Graham's, maybe he's coming to his senses now. I'm hearing him say things that he didn't say before. I'll take another look at him. I was going to vote against him because he was too close to the president, but it seems like he's coming around now. That is the strategy. Distance themselves away from the president just a little bit, not enough that his base will jump all over them, but enough to get a few people that didn't like him to reconsider. I don't think that strategy is going to work. They don't have enough time for it to work.
Yeah, they are running out of time. I really would, though, like to see Harrison be able to beat Graham in South Carolina, and for South Carolina have an all-black delegation in the Senate. I guess that would be too good a thing to happen. This go around. Val, look, like always, there's just way too much to talk about, but I do want to remind folks that you can always catch Val Atkinson on Connections on Foxy 107, 104, and he lets me sit in with him on that sometimes. So it's nice to be able to talk. So Sunday morning at 8 a.m., WFXC, WFXK at the Raleigh-Durham Market. You can hear it all the way out to Greenville, all the way up to Elizabeth City, across over to Greensboro and down to Lumberton. So you can get us there, but you can also listen to Foxy 107, 104 on the internet, right? It on the World Wide Web is streamed Sunday mornings at 8 a.m. with Val Atkinson. Val, anything else you need to tell me before we get out of here?
Just that the Kappas, the Bull City Kappas of Durham, North Carolina, they have made a compact with Radio 1 of Raleigh for voter education and participation. And we are sponsoring that with each show that we have. So listen in on Sunday mornings. We'll tell you more about that.
There you go. So that's Val Atkinson. I'm Ed Clark. We're going to take a break. And when we come back, we're going to be talking about education. Will kids go back to school? Can they go back to school? The kids who have been out of school, have they gotten any quality education? We're going to try to deal with all those issues when we come back. You're watching The Deal. We'll be right back.
George Floyd. His name was George Floyd. Say his name.
Say his name.
George Floyd. Say his name.
Say their names. Once again and always, we fight for justice. Black Lives Matter. Go to blacklivesmatter.com.
And welcome back to The Deal. I'm your host, Ed Clark, and thanks for taking the time to spend some time with us this weekend. Obviously, there's so much going on. I told you we were going to talk about education in the next block, but we're going to go ahead and bring in another guest, Irv Joyner, who's been in with us before on The Deal. Irv, welcome back to The Deal.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Well, I had an opportunity that dropped in my lap to be able to talk to you today. I want to talk to you about two things that's happened in the Supreme Court this week. One, about the case concerning whether or not electors in the Electoral College had to follow the state, what the voters in that state decided. And also whether or not Donald Trump needed to turn over his financial records, one in a case to due to a subpoena in the House, and the other was a case where the state of New York has requested his records. I want to start first, though, with the Electoral College case. One of the things that I say all the time is that Americans are not very up on civics. They don't understand that when they go to cast their vote for president, that they're casting a vote for elector. I won't beat a dead horse, but can you tell me the bottom line of that ruling, what the court said about that, and what we need to be looking at on the horizon as it relates to that ruling over faithless electors and who those people are?
Yeah, the court ruling basically upheld the Electoral College system and said that each state has a responsibility of providing guidelines for the electors who are chosen by citizens when they cast their vote for the president. And depending on what the state law is, then those electors must follow that. And if the state law requires them to vote in the same manner as the citizens have voted, then they are obligated to do so. And they can be punished in the event that they don't follow those directives. But it basically upheld the notion that the Electoral College is the vehicle which decides who is the president of this country, and they note that we need to be faithful to that design until such time as that is changed.
So in the short run, then nothing really changed. It was more an affirmation of what we kind of already knew already, right?
Right. What some of us knew.
What some of us knew. And on the second point, that the case is against where the president was not wanting to turn over financial records. I've heard some commentators say that it was a unequivocal loss for the president. The president tries to couch it as it was a win for him because some of it was remanded back to lower court, for more consideration because maybe the House didn't subpoena the records correctly and so on and so forth. What is your assessment of what the court determined in those cases?
Well, again, the court was basically followed the stated line that no person is above the law, not even the president of this country, and the president has to toe the line as to what the law is, and where there is a viable criminal investigation that requires the president to turn over records involving that president's conduct, that can be done. And if there's a challenge to that, that is a challenge to the power and the scope of the subpoena rather than the authority to obtain that information. And then the second case that they dealt with was congressional authority to obtain information from a president. And basically the court held that you have separation of powers, and a part of the separation of power gives the Congress the authority to oversee the operation of the executive branch, but they have to establish that there is a particularized congressional need in order to obtain some personal data from members of the executive branch, but that for the most part that the court upheld the structure that is in place and gave, I guess, some breath to this notion that no person is above the law and that every person has to obey what the commands of the law are.
Yeah. So one of the things, Irv, that also came out in a lot of discussions over the last couple of days is that this court is essentially not going to buy into the president's bullshit. I'll just say it straight out. We're on a podcast, so I can say that this whole notion that AG Barr and the president about this sort of imperial president, that the president has the ability to do absolutely anything. And even hearkening back to what the president said when he was running, which he could shoot somebody in the middle of Fifth Avenue and there'd be no repercussions. Have we put that to bed? or I know the president hasn't given up on it, but I mean, do you think that's going to make its way into the public psyche that really this president really can't do whatever he wants to? And I even listened to A.G. Barr Thursday night, and he kind of was even more muted in his pronouncements about the sort of executive, the imperial executive. What do you think is going to happen with Attorney General Barr and the president in their push to say that the president can do whatever he wants?
Well, I think that they will continue that push. What we have is an opportunity for them to have some breathing room in doing some of the things that they want to do, and they are looking for a victory in November that will allow them to continue to pursue that notion, and probably with more enthusiasm than this term, since it will be the last term, and they won't have to get a vote from the people. But I think you can see from what the Trump team has done thus far that they really don't care about what the law is and what the governmental structures are in place, that it is their intent to run roughshod over the law and to become a king within this democratic framework, at least for the period of time that they are in power.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I want to remind the folks you're listening to and watching The Deal with Ed Clark, and Irv Joyner was kind enough to be a guest with us. We got him at the last minute, so anytime I can get Irv Joyner, I'm happy to get him on. We're gonna finish that discussion about education and whether or not schools are going to open back up in the next segment. But I asked Val Atkinson to come back, and Val, are you still there? Do you have anything you want to talk to Irv? Yeah, can you?
I'm still here. Irv, I wanted to ask you one question as it has to relate to the next administration. And it's an assumptive question. And assuming that Donald Trump is not reelected, my question is based on that assumption. Is there legal approaches that can be taken by the next administration, assuming that the Senate is controlled by Democrats along with the House? Are there any legal measures that can be taken to undo what some people are calling McConnell courts? Barack Obama was denied the ability to put on even have his person of choice even interviewed. And that's just one. At my last count, there was almost 100 people, if you look at all three levels of the federal court system, that have been put in place. Is there anything, if we got the authority over Congress and the presidency, that can be done if we wanted to reverse some of this?
Well, actually, Val, there were 200 judges who have been placed in positions of power, but those are lifetime appointments. And so with respect to them, there is nothing can be done unless they engage in some impeachable offense during their tenure in office. But once they were confirmed by the Senate, then they are in place. Now that's different though from laws, regulations, and other things that's been created over the last 4 years, because Congress can change all of that. At any point, all they need is 51% of the members of Congress and the Senate to change any law that they find to be objectionable or injurious to the citizenry. So that is something that can be done, and that is why you need to have not only control of the executive branch, but also control of the two branches of the Congress, the Senate and the House of Representatives. If you don't have that, then you have a battle royale that's going to occur as to the exercise of power and what rules need to be rolled back and or changed.
Mhm. Yeah, that's a good point, Irv. I mean, we've been talking a lot on this program over the last 3-4 months about how important the Senate elections are going to be, because right now Mitch McConnell has essentially been able to put in these 200 people who are appointed for life. And the last question I have for you related to that, a lot of those judges have not had good marks from the Bar Association. They have not been recommended, which is very different. Every other administration that I can think of has always at least had people who were ruled to be qualified by the bar. These people aren't. They're getting anybody that has a pulse that says they're a part of the Federalist Society to be on the court. Can you talk about some of those judges that have been appointed?
Well, in terms of their qualifications, they are questionable in many instances. Clearly, they are ideologues because they were all a part of the Federalist Society, which carries a specific legal view as to how the law should be interpreted and applied. That is a view that is very conservative and one that does not necessarily benefit African Americans or other racial minorities, or what is called the least of these within the society. So you have to take cases where you have these judges in place. You have to either convince them to follow the law after you've educated them about what the law is, and then take it up then finally to the Supreme Court. But once you get to the Supreme Court, you have the same issues that you have at the lower court. So it's going to be an ongoing battle. And you wait until there is a vacancy, and then you try to get different people into those positions who can have a better understanding of the law and a broader world's view of the life of people, particularly those like us who are part of the downtrodden and repressed community.
Well, good Lord, I just hope that, we can make some changes. We do need the Senate because we need the better appointments, but I guess we won't get better appointments until we also have a new president. So that's another one of our tasks, is to replace both the leader of the Senate and the president. Well, Irv Joyner, I appreciate you stepping in at the last minute here and coming in with us, and Val for sticking around. Like I promised, we are really going to talk about whether or not schools are going to open back up in the fall. So if you're watching, please stick and stay. I'll be right back after this message.
Once there was a boy who did the same thing again and again. One day he was told he had autism. He got help and slowly learned how to live with it better.
Early intervention can make a lifetime of difference. Learn the signs at autismspeaks.org.
Here are AARP's top tips on caregiver preparedness during coronavirus. Form a caregiving team. Inventory essential supplies and medications. Make a plan to stay connected. Maintain self-care and follow CDC guidelines. Learn more on our website.
I think it's really important that we separate all of the politics here and talk about what's best for our children. We know that they need to get back in school. They need to do it in a safe way, and that can be a combination of in-person learning and remote learning, depending on the circumstances, depending on the student. But
welcome back to The Deal. I'm your host, Ed Clark, and thanks for taking the time to come in with us again this week. I want to thank Irv Joyner, professor of law from North Carolina Central University, who was with us in the last segment. Of course, I want to thank Val Atkinson, our political analysis person who was in with us on the first segment. This third segment, I wanted to devote to education today. And as I said, we were trying to had an effort to get a principal on, and we're still working on that. But in the meantime, we're going to bring back our educational consultant, Frances McNeill. Frances, welcome back to The Deal.
Hi, Ed. Nice to be with you again.
Francis, I was been thinking about you a lot the last week because there's been all this talk about reopening schools, what the possibility of reopening schools was going to be. The president has been very out front saying that schools had to be open, and if they weren't open, he was going to try to withhold funding. We won't even talk about that right now. I want to back up though. I want to ask you, has there been any real good assessment of what's happened since schools had to close back in March? We could talk about North Carolina specifically because that's where we are. Do you know of any sort of assessment that's been done of what happened with that distance learning or attempt to do distance learning for kids since schools had to close back in March?
Well, the good thing about having to transition so quickly from in-class and in-person type of learning into a remote setting, we understood and learned our inadequacies as far as the Wi-Fi situation. We are not as 21st century ready as we thought we were. One of the biggest hangups in the county that I work at was providing mobile devices that were able to log into instructional hours and times with teachers for every student. So we have addressed that need, and it will be much better the second time around. The second and most, I would think, most impactful thing about remote learning was the supportive measures that are offered to children at home. It's just, we had a really hard time grappling with students that didn't have those structures that set up environmental and educational settings the way they did in the classroom. And we don't even want to talk about our EC populations, all of those students that would have to have differentiated instruction. So there were a lot of drawbacks. However, one of the things that always come out of a situation is you learn a lot. So our learning curve was very high. I don't think it is as high as it would be going back into the fall if we had to do virtual type learning as it is being discussed now. So I think we learned a lot. We were caught off guard, totally unprepared, as was every industry. I don't think any industry was prepared to go through the complete lockdown that we went through.
Yeah, that's a good point. The one thing that though is different now, I think, than back in March when we last talked, is that the incidence of infection has continued to increase. Nobody knew how long this was going to last back in March. People, were assuming it'd be a month or two or whatever. We're 4 or 5 months into this, and North Carolina is just hitting its peaks. And Arizona, Florida, Texas, all of those places are actually hitting their peaks now. And when I think people had gotten a false sense of relief because it was mainly in the Northeast. Mm-hmm. The difference now is that we have to deal with masks and all that other stuff. Has anyone talked about how you go back to school? Say if you have to be in a physical building, will people be wearing masks and shields and having to space kids out? Has there been any talk about how you do it if they have to be physically in the classroom?
So there has been nothing concrete that has been decided upon from legislators, board members, NCDPI, all of the factors that regulate public schools. There's nothing finite about the decisions. As you can see in the news, every county has a different model, which is one of the more difficult things to do. We know that our schools supply parents with adequate and safe places to send students. We also know how important social, emotional environments are for students that are growing and developing, especially our young children. But there's been nothing concrete that has been put in place as to how we would provide that. Different counties have different models. I think a lot of the counties are allowing parents to sign up for Virtual Academy if they choose to and don't feel like their students are going to be safe in the schools. But we still have a huge health crisis that's going on. No one still is able to tell how the virus is transmitted. Is it now we're talking about airborne versus droplets? They don't have masks that fit small children. So there are just a lot of unanswered questions when we're having to look at bringing students back into a building. We know that we have to do social distancing. We know that masks do work. So how do we get that? So I would love to have those answers for you, Ed, but everyone is following the lead of the leaders in Raleigh. and they haven't made those concrete decisions as of today.
You know, Francis, one of the things that I also thought about is you used to be a classroom teacher. You used to be in classroom, you're in front of students or whatever. And have you talked to teachers about how they feel? I mean, some of the teachers will have pre-existing conditions, which will make them more susceptible. Some of the teachers are older, you know, being around young kids who may get the virus but not have symptoms is going to be a challenge. Have you talked to teachers? And that's one of the few things I think I've heard discussions about. Nobody's really saying anything about the people who are working there, the janitors, the people that work in the cafeteria. Have you talked to those kind of people?
Well, there's some information now. If you have pre-existing conditions, and they have some of the big ones that are listed. You can also opt to do virtual academy, teaching from home. So they are offering the teachers that. However, and this is just from an African-American point of view, and it's my opinion, it has nothing to do with that I'm stating anything that was done erroneous. But of all the things that were listed, all of the ongoing and health risks, hypertension was not up there. So we know where hypertension mostly reside in the African-American populations, and most of our educators that are 40 plus typically have that condition. So we do know that a lot of the African Americans that have been fatal to COVID had hypertension. So there are a list of diseases and ongoing ailments that if you have one of those, you can opt to not go back into the classroom this fall. So they did do that, but we've got to have conversations about diseases that are predominant in minority communities.
Yeah, that's a good point. I want to remind the folks that you're listening to and watching The Deal with Ed Clark. And Frances McNeill is with us. She's a educational consultant. Used to be a classroom teacher. Now she helps folks figure out how to teach better and how to evaluate teachers and all those kind of things. And we're trying to figure out whether or not school's going to open in the fall in a lot of places. Some places maybe, but there's some challenges in Arizona, Florida, Texas, and even North Carolina where we happen to be right now. Francis, when we talked back in March the first time, again, like I said, nobody had any idea what this would be like, and a lot of people were optimistic that the distance education was going to work for kids. And you alluded to it at the beginning of this interview that there were some challenges, that everybody didn't have the internet speeds that they need, or even have the equipment. And maybe some things are going to be better in the fall if we have to depend on that. What's still lacking, though, and not necessarily in the places where you consult, but think about it broadly around the country. Are we just behind in our thinking about how you educate kids in a very modern era where they're used to being on Instagram and TikTok and all those kind of things? Is it time to think about a different way to educate kids?
I certainly believe so. As you know, the public school system was set up from an agricultural point of view. And so we created a paradigm where students went to sit and get. That model has long ago shifted. And the misnomer is that if you put a Chromebook, you put some kind of technological device in a student's hand, you have enhanced their learning. Well, young people are much more savvy with technology than the teachers that are teaching them. And we have long ago been catching up with the students, and they have to actually, when it comes to technology, not knowledge-based and content, when it comes to technology, they power down a little bit when they come into the classroom. So for the standpoint of how to best educate students, we are behind times, I would believe, certainly. And the thing that I was questioning is there's so many virtual academies that were set up as charters. Are we not learning from these environments, or were they not successful? I mean, this is not something that a wheel that we have to create. This has been done before. And I just was at awe when we were just struggling to set up some form of system and still want to send out pamphlets and paper copies and hard copies of material, which is very expensive to try to educate a whole building with paper copy material for 45 days. However, because that is what people are accustomed to, that is what school systems try to implement in their remote learning. So I feel like we are behind the curve to some degree because we have not used technology in a way that best suit the way students learn. They can multitask, they can do several things, they're password savvy. I often run into problems with programs that are provided by the district and classrooms because teachers say there's too many clicks to get in the program. Well, students they can do passwords, they can do, they do all kinds of things to get to the things that they need to get in. So it's not their challenge, it's your challenge that why we are not using technological programs and devices in a way that supports 21st century learners.
Well, those are all good points, Francis. I know we're about to run out of time. And again, I really appreciate you at the last minute. Like I said, things change and guests change, and you were Johnny on the spot and able to come in and fill in. I do want to have you back though as soon as possible, because I think in the next few weeks it's going to be where the rubber meets the road, right? I think in North Carolina, the governor is going to make a decision this weekend and announce next week whether or not schools are going to open. And if they don't, whatever that plan is going to be, I'm pretty sure you're going to be helping school districts try to figure out how to implement that, how to
right. Absolutely.
Or whatever. And one of the things the governor did allude to is that there may be a combination of distance and of people being in school, or rotating schedules where kids are only in there 2 or 3 days a week, and so everybody's not there at the same time. So it's going to be a challenge. So first off, thank you for taking the time to come in with us today. And second, I expect to have you back because we need to figure this out.
Well, thank you for having me. And as we are figuring it out, it would be so much more simple if everyone was doing the same thing. If you look at other countries, there was a countrywide policy for how we dealt with COVID. We have counties neighboring each other that have different implementations of the fall school year. Well, there's a lot of parents that work in one county and live in another county. So can we all not just do the same thing? And then the business and the commerce industry would have to adjust to schools versus schools having to adjust to commerce. So we've got to do better about our planning. We got to look at leadership, and we certainly have to get out and build up our grassroots efforts, which the deal is doing one of those. And we are forever grateful for what you're doing, Ed, getting information out to families about things that affect their daily lives. So looking forward to talking with you again. I'm learning as you're learning, and hopefully we'll have a plan that will keep our children and our educators safe in the fall.
Well, thank you again, Frances McNeill. That's Frances McNeill. She's I'm going to call her our educational consultant. She doesn't know it, but she's officially on the staff now. So whenever we need to call on Frances McNeill, we will. And in the meantime, I want to thank everybody who's participated today. Tell people about the deal. We've had guests from Dallas, from Ireland, from Florida, from everywhere, trying to get information out to people. I think it's important to hear some different voices. A lot of times you'll watch the news as a 1 minute, clip, and you don't get the full sense. So on this show, we had the guy who started the protest about Ahmaud Arbery. And had he not started that protest, you wouldn't know about it, but he's been here on the deal. And so those are the kind of guests we go after. And then we have people like Frances McNeill, our educational consultant, who's with us. In the meantime, make sure you read the posts that we do. We try to post a new blog post a couple times a week. And then we're always here on the weekend with a new episode of The Deal. And sometimes we have a special episode during the middle of the week. In the meantime, I'll be on Connections on Foxy 107, 104 tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. That's Sunday, July the 12th at 8 a.m. So if you're in Eastern North Carolina, you can either listen on 104.3 or 107.1. And you can also stream it live online. That'll be with Val Atkinson. And our guest tomorrow will be a guest who was on with us earlier, Irv Joyner, who is professor of constitutional law at North Carolina Central University Law School. A really interesting discussion we're going to have there. So in the meantime, do what we ask you to do every week, which is to do something good. It's really easy to do. And we'll be back next weekend, and check out the deal with edclark.com during the week for specials and our blog posts. Thanks a lot. See you next week. Bye.